faster than a speeding bullet,
I ran until my muscles burned and my veins pumped battery acid.
more powerful than a locomotive.
An idea is like a virus, resilient, highly contagious.
Able to leap tall buildings in a single bound.
Hey guys, Jared Moon here, and welcome to the Better Humanology podcast. This week, we have Jimmy Moore, and what I'm going to need you to do is go ahead and get out a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil and start taking notes, or just listen very, very closely. Jimmy is a very knowledgeable guy. His weight loss journey and overall transformation is incredible, something that we talk about, but also we cover a lot about ketosis and fasting, and those two topics alone are enough to chew on, and we talk a lot about them in this episode, and I know you're probably interested to know if you can utilize these either as an athlete, someone to lose weight, or someone just who wants to become a better human. So if you want to know more about these topics, stick around for this week's episode. All right, let's talk to Jimmy. All right, Jimmy, I'm super pumped to have you on the show, man. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this today.
Bub the volume. What's up, man?
Dude, so you have a number of podcasts yourself, don't you? I was checking them out, man, and you must be a busy guy.
I have 5 podcasts a week, 3 of the Live and La Vida Low Carb show Monday through Wednesday, which is my flagship show. It's now the longest running health podcast on the internet. It's so funny. I have the longest running health podcast, and I'm not a PhD, an MD, an RD, or any D after my name. I'm just a guy trying to help educate people. So it's pretty cool. And then, Keto Talk on Thursdays, where we talk about ketogenic diets, and Fasting Talk on Fridays, where we talk about fasting. So yes, not a dull moment in the Moore household.
Yeah, man. I think one's keeping me pretty busy, so I have a lot of respect for you there. So we like to kick the show off, challenging our listeners, make sure that they're going to have a great week, challenging themselves. And when I have a guest on, I love to throw that to the guest. So you ready to challenge our listeners with a few things?
Yeah, let's bring it.
All right, cool. So the first thing, I'm actually going to start out of order than normal this week. How about a book recommendation for our listeners?
On what topic?
It could literally be anything: health, fitness, nutrition, self-improvement, anything any book you like, really, one of your favorites maybe.
You know, there's a lot of great books, and I have so many friends out there that are writing books right now, so it's a little bit hard for me to say one book, but I will narrow it down to one book. And depending on when this airs, there's a book that just came out or will have just came out probably by the time this airs, called The Keto Diet by Leanne Vogel. And if you're interested in the ketogenic diet, I'm sure we're going to talk about that here today quite a bit. It is by far the most phenomenal book all about nutritional ketosis that I think I've ever seen, and I've written 2, so and writing a couple more, and it was just very well done. It gives you all the ins and outs. It's very beautiful, but it's The Keto Diet by Leanne Vogel.
Awesome, man. I'll definitely check that out. And let's continue down this road. So how about a physical challenge, fitness, or just something that challenge the listeners physically?
Yes, go to a local tire store, and it sounds weird, but go to one of those like big tractor tire stores and go to the front desk and say, hey, I want to get one of your big old tractor tires. And if you go out back, you'll actually see a graveyard of tons of them. I did this a couple of years ago, and they just gave it to me. They didn't charge me a dime for it. It's just going to sit there and rot. But I grabbed it, put it in my backyard, and now I use that to flip and get a really great workout. You haven't worked out until you flipped a big old tire.
Oh, no, yeah.
and I love that, man.
Yeah, those are a lot of fun. I heard it actually costs them more money to recycle it than it is to just give it away. It does. And so they're
just
happy
like,
to give
please
them away.
take it off our hands. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. I love that challenge. What's funny is so I do a lot of working out at home, garage gym stuff, but that's like one of the only things I haven't gone to go to get. I need to do that.
You've been challenged. Go.
Yeah, I'm going to have to do it now. I think
just bring another person to help you lift it because they are very heavy.
Yeah, I got to clear it with the wife too. She thinks I have enough stuff as is. But all right, man, how about a mental toughness challenge for the listeners?
Mental toughness challenge, I would say ignore the haters. Now, with what I do online, Jared, I get a lot of haters pretty much on a daily basis. When you become internet famous, unfortunately, that's one of the side effects. So if you start getting haters being online, congratulations, you've arrived. And I think that's a good thing to just have in general, even if you're not famous online or whatever. Just who you are. Be you, and nobody else knows how to be you better than you. So you be you, and cut out the noise, turn it off. As sometimes our brain wants to go there. We want to say, well, I want people to like me, and I want people to know where I'm coming from. No, some people just want to be your saboteur. So your brain needs to go in that direction of you're your best advocate. You're your only best advocate. So ignore the haters.
I love that, man. And yeah, I think if you get some haters, that probably means you're doing something right, or at least you're
You're doing
challenging the
some good
status
stuff.
quo, Awesome.
And
Dude.
the good thing is, most of the time when you become internet famous, most of the time when you get haters, you got at least 10, 20 times people that love you. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, man. So I really appreciate the challenges. I know all the listeners do as well. I think that's awesome. But now I'd love to go over your story a little bit. I'll take notes during it and make sure that, I have some really good questions. Because I read a little bit about your background, but I'd rather you tell the story for the listeners and kind of go from, you can pick it up wherever you want, at birth, or you can kind of skip to your story wherever you think is the most important, and then we'll go from there into what you're doing today and kind of what your mission is these days.
it all happened a long, long time ago
In a galaxy far, far away.
in a galaxy not too far from here. Yeah, so I grew up, my mom was a single mom most of my growing up years. And so what did I get fed? Hamburger Helper and Cheerio, or not Cheerios, Fruit Loops, Cocoa Puffs. Am I hitting on any old things that people used to eat? And we'd have canned biscuits. And what's interesting, I was a child of the 1980s. So in the 1980s, of course, the low-fat diet came on strong. And my mom bought into it hook, line, and sinker, but she had 3 kids that she was raising. And so she'd buy us all that junk food. Meanwhile, juxtapose that to the fat-free ice cream that she had in the freezer and the rice cakes. My brother Kevin and I used to try to put peanut butter on the rice cakes to see if it made them taste better. No, they don't. They were still nasty. So that was the culture that I grew up in. And I was big as a kid, as was my brother and sister. And when I graduated from high school, everybody assumes, oh, you're out of the house now. You know how to eat. Why do people, assume that you just automatically know how to eat once you become an adult? No, you know what you know. And what I knew was Hamburger Helper and eating pizza and eating fast food. That was normal when it came to eating. And so in my 20s, I got bigger and bigger and bigger. And of course, every few years I'd get a conscious and say, oh, I guess I should do something about my weight. So I'd go on a low fat diet because that's what everybody does. They cut their calories, they cut their fat, and they expect that to make them healthy. Well, all it made me was hungry and irritable. I very famously went on a low fat diet in 1999, very successful at losing weight. But my wife, Christine, will tell you I was not a happy man that year because I basically cut out all the fat in my diet. And we now know that our brain is 70% fat. And so if you're not eating fat, your brain's going to rebel. And it's going to say, hey, dummy, hello, please feed me some fat. And so I obviously binged and gained back all the weight that I had lost on that. In 1999. And what precipitated that one was my brother Kevin, at the age of 32, having a series of heart attacks. He had 3 heart attacks in the span of a week.
Wow.
That nearly killed him at the age of 32. He did eventually die in 2008 at the age of 41 of heart disease, morbid obesity, and uncontrolled type 2 diabetes. So I now, do my work in his memory. So flash forward after that 1999 experience, and I said, you know what, if I have to eat a low-fat diet for the rest of my life to be healthy, I'd rather eat whatever the heck I want and be happy. And that was a really dangerous position to be in, Jared. But then 2003 rolls around, and I get a diet book for Christmas. Anybody else get diet books for Christmas? I sure did. And not just from anybody, from my mother-in-law.
Oh,
So
nice.
I got one like every year. One year she gave me Dr. Phil's diet book. Today can be a changing day in your life. No, Dr. Phil, that's another low-fat diet. I don't think it's going to change my life. But she gave me a book this particular year for Christmas, Dr. Atkins' New Diet Revolution, and it totally revolutionized my life to the point that I'm here today. I'm alive today, number one. I don't think I would be alive. I think I would have joined my brother by now had I not changed, and it totally changed everything about my life, which you're about to hear. So I read that book, and I thought, you're out of your mind, Dr. Atkins. Eat more fat. He's a cardiologist and telling people to eat the very thing that we know will raise your cholesterol and give you heart disease and clog your arteries. And then he said, eat less carbs. How are you supposed to have any energy at all if you're not eating carbohydrates? But I thought, you know what? I have tried every low-fat diet known to man, but I've never tried a low-carb diet before. So let's give this a go. So January 1st, 2004, it started off as a New Year's resolution to lose weight. It ended up being a new life resolution to get healthy. And so I lost 30 pounds the first month and started feeling really, really good and wanted to go to the gym to get all this energy out of my system. So the second month I go to the gym, lose another 40 pounds in the second month, and the end of 100 days lost 100 pounds. And I was like, there's something to this. And it was just pouring off my body. And by the end of that year, I did lose 180 pounds. The Atkins people contacted me and said, hey, we've heard you've lost a little bit of weight on our diet. Yes, yeah, just a little. And so they featured my story on the front of their website. And they said, can we share this with the world? Yeah, go ahead. So I started getting all these emails around the world. How'd you do it? How'd you do it? Who are you? Where's your book? Who are you? And so I'm like, well, you people leave me alone. And this was 2005 after this success. And I said, well, maybe I should try to write about this, because I was very passionate at that point, having seen such weight loss and health success. And what I didn't tell you, I came off of 3 prescription medications as well. So I was on high cholesterol medication, high blood pressure medication, as well as respiratory issue medication. And all of that was gone. And so it literally changed my physical life. But then here's the fun part. I started a blog called Livin' La Vida Low Carb in April of 2005, and it quickly grew in popularity. People started reading it, and 1 year later, this guy comes to me and he says, if you talk half as good as you write, you need to be a podcaster. 2006, he said, you need to be a podcaster. Now, nobody was podcasting in 2006, at least not in the health realm. I think most of the podcasts at that time were political and maybe entertainment related, but not many at all. Now everybody and their mama has a podcast. So he said, let's start a show. And what do you want to call it? And I was like, well, my blog's called Livin' La Vida Low Carb. So how about the Livin' La Vida Low Carb show? And so he's like, okay, works for me. And so we started it, and I never interviewed anybody before, but I started attending some of these conferences, and they were like, hey, you should interview these doctors. And I don't know how to interview. I have no skill set in that. I haven't been educated in how to do that. And so I started doing it. I was so nervous. I've gotten pretty good over the years. So now I'm at 1,250 episodes now, the longest running health podcast on the internet. So it's a pretty cool gig. And so that success then breeded more podcasts like we talked about earlier. But it also got the attention of a publisher. So in 2012, Victory Belt Publishing asked me to start writing books for them. And they're like, what do you want to write about? 2012. I said, ketogenic diets. First thing out of my mouth. And they're like, that's too niche. Nobody's going to buy any books about ketogenic diets. You're wrong, but okay, how about cholesterol? And that's when I got my into the publisher. I wrote Cholesterol Clarity, did pretty good. And a year later, I said, can I please write the keto book now? Let's call it, I don't know, Keto Clarity. And they're like, okay, but we still don't think it's going to do very well. Well, in the first week, it sold more copies than Cholesterol Clarity did the whole first year. Wow. Needless to say, they became big fans of ketogenic diets, and it's now my biggest selling book. I think we've sold like 120,000 copies of just that book. and it spawned other books after that. And I have 3 new ones coming the next year. So it's kind of a cool gig I get to live in this life now, all because I changed my life and read a diet book my mother-in-law gave me for Christmas.
Wow, you have a lot to, a lot of credit to give to your mother-in-law there.
I did. And what's funny is I never knew the full story until just this last Christmas. I said, you remember when you gave me that diet book? Oh, yeah, we had bought that. We saw it in a grocery store. We saw Dr. Atkins' book in a grocery store. We read it and we thought, oh, that kind of makes sense. Maybe this will help Jimmy. And so, yeah, so kudos to them for not kind of going, well, wow, that's wackadoodle. Who would do that? That doesn't look very, very healthy. They didn't. They knew, and I know they cared about me and cared about me wanting to be healthier. And my wife Christine was always getting upset that I couldn't do anything about the weight and about the health. And so, yeah, it literally changed my life. And it was just on a whim that they saw that in a grocery store and picked it up. So wouldn't it be funny if full circle Keto Clarity ends up in like grocery stores someday and somebody else gives it to a son-in-law or whatever. So it's funny how the world works like that.
Well, man, that's an incredible story. And I could probably, given all your books, I have checked them all out. The keto, you've written on ketosis, low carb, fasting, cholesterol, some of the things that you named. So if I wanted to, I could definitely probably have a conversation with you about each one of these for hours, so I want to make sure that the listeners maybe get like a good overview of all of them, and then I'll definitely point them in the direction of your literature, in the podcast show notes and everything, because I think what you're doing is great. But I do want to start with keto, because I think keto has been getting more and more popular. Like it's just, and you would know better than me, but it just seems how I gauge that normally is I have a lot of athletes I train in my website, and the questions I always field questions. Like the more questions I'm getting, that's I can kind of tell trends are headed one direction. And the question I'm just starting to get over and over and over again is keto for athletes. Should I be doing this? All of that. So I would like to kind of throw it to you. Maybe you can give my listeners like a quick what ketosis is, just in case someone has not heard about it yet, and then we can move into kind of the healing benefits it has for your body and whatnot.
Absolutely. So, ketosis is not some mysterious word. It's actually been a part of pretty much all of human history. When we've gone periods of time without eating, we've been in ketosis. When we've had a big animal kill, our ancestors had a big animal kill, they would always go for the fat first, and there was very little carbohydrate in that diet. That put them in a state of ketosis. So this is a very natural, very normal way to fuel the body. And that's the way to think about it. Most people walking around, Jared, they're sugar burners. And so probably 95+% of the population around the world are basically using sugar for fuel. And so when you have sugar for fuel from carbohydrates and to a lesser degree protein, you actually only have about 2,000 calories worth of energy at your disposal. But the beautiful thing is there's another source of fuel on the body, and it's fat. And you think about it, when the body stores energy, how does it store it? It stores it as glucose in the glycogen stores, that 2,000 calories. But guess where it puts most of the energy? It puts it in the form of fat on your body. And so that fat it's not just some gross thing that people, oh my gosh, you gained weight. No, that's actually energy, and your body uses it as such. So what you're trying to do is tap into that as an energy source, which, oh yeah, by the way, in a lean person, somebody like yourself, Jared, you have 60,000 calories worth of fat on your body right now to fuel you. Wow. So the beautiful thing is to try to tap into that 60,000 versus the 2,000, which when you're a sugar burner, you have to constantly refeed every few hours. That's why all those dietitians say eat every few hours. Well, you have to or you'll be starving. But if you shift your body from sugar burner to fat burner, you can go long periods of time without eating very naturally. So here's what happens. You cut down the carbohydrates in the diet, and that's the first step. Then you have to moderate down on the protein. Now, protein is essential and you need a certain obligate amount. And of course, if you're exercising and building muscle, you probably need an obligate amount more, but not to the degree that you might think. I know some bodybuilders that eat 300 grams of protein in a day.
Wow.
Like, jeez. Maybe 130 grams for someone like that, 120 grams gives them all the protein they need because that protein will get recycled again and again and again. And that's something that people don't hear about very often. So moderating the protein, keeping the carbs low, and then what's left is fat. So you ramp up the fat in your diet. And so it's a high fat, moderate protein, low carb diet. And it takes somewhere between 2 to 4 weeks for most people to make that shift over from using sugar as fuel to using fat as fuel. And when you start using fat as fuel, the byproduct of that are ketones. And so I can get real nerdy about ketones if you want to ask about that, but that's basically what a ketogenic diet is. You're shifting from that sugar burner over to being the fat and ketone burner as your primary fuel source.
That's a great breakdown of ketosis. Yeah, I do want to talk about ketones, but I also want to know, why would someone want to switch? What are some of the best benefits of being in ketosis?
Oh my goodness, we can be here all day. In Keto Clarity, I put the things that we have very strong evidence for a ketogenic diet. And the one that most people think about is weight loss. But weight loss is insignificant in my mind as the reason to go on a ketogenic diet. It's a nice side effect of being healthy, weight loss is. But I would much rather control insulin level. So if you're type 2 diabetic or you're insulin resistant or you have anything on that insulin resistance spectrum, if you're a woman, PCOS is a very common form of insulin resistance. If you start to have brain health issues and maybe like that brain fog, a ketogenic diet clears that up so much because 70% of your brain is fat, like I mentioned earlier. So you start feeding your brain fat and oh yeah, by the way, your brain loves ketones. And so you start getting this really, I can't describe it adequately. Your brain is on fire. Like right now, I can really feel that my brain is firing on all synapses right now. And it's fun, when you have that clarity of mind, it's a beautiful thing. If I got no other benefits from ketosis, but those brain health benefits, I would do this all day, every day.
That's awesome. And yeah, I know that's a big part of why I do a lot of what I do. People, ask, about my diet, fitness, and all of those things. And really what I'm trying to do is just be optimal. I'm not necessarily, because I could get in a car accident tomorrow.
Right.
I'm not trying to live the longest life, even though that would be a nice added benefit to try and live a healthy and fit life as long as I can. But I'm just trying to be optimal each and every single day so I can do things like this, do new things on my website, and be operating at my best. So I 100% agree with that benefit of ketosis.
Well, and here's the cool thing for athletes and some of your clients that you were talking about that have been inquiring about keto. If you like to recover fast, a ketogenic diet helps with that. How does it do that? It's an anti-inflammatory diet. So obviously when you're breaking down your muscle in the gym, you're causing a lot of inflammation. Well, you want to recover from that inflammation quickly. A ketogenic diet will do that. If you have a big plate of pasta, thinking that you're doing yourself good, guess what? You're just continuing the inflammation that's going to make that recovery that much longer. So for the athlete, and here's the beautiful thing for the endurance athlete, that fat burning versus sugar burning, you can go a long period of time in a race as a fat burner without having to use the goos and the gels and all the Gatorade and all that other stuff that they use. You don't have to refuel because, oh yeah, by the way, it's not 2,000 calories, which is the sugar burner. It's 60,000 calories. So you're basically using that fuel on your body as God intended. God put that fat on your body for the purpose of fueling you and giving you an alternative fuel source.
That's incredible. I think endurance athletes are the ones are the ones that I've been talking to, are the ones who have experimented this with the most lately, because I feel like they really do get the most benefit as opposed to, a fast twitch type athlete. But I do want to ask one question before we move on anywhere else. So
yeah.
You said it's obviously high fat, moderate protein, low carbohydrate. Now, I get the fat, I get the protein. What are we doing with the carbohydrates? What are you consuming primarily as carbohydrates to stay in ketosis, but still, try and maintain your health overall, getting all of the micronutrients you need?
Yeah, it's a work in progress, and it's going to vary from person to person. So for someone like me who came from 410 pounds at one point in my life, very insulin resistant, still to this day, very insulin resistant, I have to keep the carbs pretty minimal. So for me, that's around 25 to 30 grams of total carbohydrate a day. So where do those carbs come from other than the nominal carbs that are in eggs and meat and that kind of thing? Green leafy vegetables primarily would be a source of carbohydrate, non-starchy vegetables. But to the athletes, to the fast switch athletes that you were just mentioning, here's a beautiful thing. Someone like that could probably eat 100 grams of carbohydrate in a meal, either before or after the workout. Depending on who you ask, some people say eat before, some people say eat after. I think after is probably better, and in a fasted state, you'll burn more fat, but that's just my opinion. But everybody has opinions on that one. But I think for them, you're still going to experience fat burning. You're still going to experience ketosis because you're basically using up the sugar burning from that carbohydrate that you consumed. You're using it up. And so if you're training in a ketogenic state and then have these momentary periods of adding in strategic carbohydrates, and I'm not talking about gobs upon gobs and definitely not junk. We're talking about sweet potato. We're talking about, maybe another starchy vegetable of some sort. I think those people can see benefit from that. And yet they're still in fat burning because their body's not as metabolically compromised as someone like me who has to stay pretty low in the carbohydrate all the time. So it's a sliding scale, to answer your question, depending on who you are. And you got to figure that out. You got to know, am I insulin resistant? Am I seeing blood sugar levels that are kind of elevated in the morning? Am I seeing insulin levels starting to rise? Am I seeing other markers in my health that's telling me that I probably need to keep my carbs on the lower end? And you'll know that. And then the athlete have a little bit more, but not a free for all. I think sometimes athletes, they say, well, I'm an athlete and I'm going to burn it all up. And so they just go hog wild and they end up getting an excess and their body doesn't know what to do with it. So guess what it does? It stores it as body fat.
And so I have actually, I can't confirm it, and I actually want to ask that question as well. I've only been into a state of ketosis one time that I purposefully tried, but I did not, I didn't test my urine or my blood. But I was eating like fewer than 30 grams of carbohydrates for weeks on end, and I was doing this on purpose. I was trying to go into a state of ketosis, and I do feel like I made that switch. I feel like I could tell. I felt a little crappy during the transition, and then once I finally feel like I fully made it, like I said, I didn't test it or anything as far as blood.
Why didn't you test?
Yeah, to be honest, I didn't know enough about ketosis. This was a few years ago. Someone had just told me about it, and I didn't know that to be honest, it was complete ignorance. I didn't know there was a way to test for ketones.
There's a lot of ways now.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, this ketosis thing sounds amazing. Like, I'm going to try it. He gave me a recommendation on about how many carbs, and I went even lower than that just to try to be sure. So it was complete ignorance on my part, and I'm aware of that stuff now. But the thing that I wanted to ask and lead to was, what do you recommend now for testing as far as knowing for a fact, yep, you're in a state of ketosis, good job, now let's keep it there?
A lot of people give me flack because I recommend people test, but I'm not saying test forever. I'm saying test just to know where you are. And then over time, after you've tested, for a certain period of time, you kind of know, Jared, okay, I can feel that I'm in ketosis because you get a certain feeling about you. But I think testing gives you that verifiability of, oh yeah, I am burning fat for fuel. I have made that switch. So the gold standard right now for testing for ketones is blood testing. So there's several meters out there on the market that you can find that test for blood ketones. And so that will give you a level of, and there will be a test at the end, so pay attention. Beta hydroxybutyrate is the key ketone body that's in the blood. And so you're testing for that. And so why is testing blood important? Because maybe you've heard about urine ketone test strips and you pee on the stick and it turns pink to purple and whatever. So the problem with urine is it's highly unreliable, and it's simply the spilling over of ketones, not necessarily what's being used as a fuel source in the blood. So I'm not a fan of urine ketone. By the way, the urine ketone is called acetoacetate. So acetoacetate, you can spill over a lot of ketones early on when you first make this transition, and maybe that gives you encouragement if you pee on the stick and see the color change. But what you really want is what's happening in that blood and giving you fat for fuel. You'll get a precise number. So it's measured in millimolar per liter, and you're looking for anything above 0.5 on the low end and probably somewhere around 3 for the high end. Now, you can go higher than 3. There's definitely no danger going to 5, 6, 7. 20 is dangerous, and we could talk about that here in a minute. But and then there's one other ketone in the body. It's in the breath, and it's called acetone. And so right now there's 1 meter that measures acetone in the breath. It's called Ketonix, Ketonix. And if you go to .coinamerica.com around the world, you can actually get one of these. $200 for thousands upon thousands of times to test your breath. And you might be like, well, why would you test your breath if blood is the gold standard? Well, blood is extremely expensive, upwards of maybe $4 per strip, per test for the blood, whereas you got this $200 device that you can blow in thousands of times. I've had the original Ketonix for 4 years now, and it still works. And so I'm still blowing into it, and it's still giving me a indication of if I'm in ketosis or not. And it's pretty well correlated with blood ketones, not exactly, because it is a different ketone body, but it's definitely different than the urine, which is totally all the spilled over. The breath actually does measure some of the usable form of ketones in the blood, in the body.
And would you recommend ketosis for anyone and everyone?
I don't think everybody needs it. And you know, that shocks people because they're like, you're the keto guy. You're supposed to tell everybody to be on ketosis. No, I don't. I think strategically it's going to help just about anybody that tries it. But does everybody need it is the question. And I say no. Although I will say this caveat, I think most of the population has obesity, has type 2 diabetes, has some level of insulin resistance. That's a huge, huge, huge segment of the population. And I think all of those people absolutely need a ketogenic diet. We're now seeing it for cancer. We're now seeing it for Alzheimer's disease, of course, type 2 diabetes, and even for exercise performance. So, I mean, we're seeing a lot of uses for it. We're almost getting to the point where who shouldn't do it? And so it's such a small segment of the population who absolutely should not do it. I don't think there's harm because we're just talking about real food at the end of the day.
Yeah, and it's something that I'm actually planning to start here in the next few months. And I have an endurance event coming up in August. And that's the primary reason and I don't want to go into ketosis like right before the event. I want to get used to training in that state and everything. So my wife and I have been talking about it a lot, and because we're going to do it together. She loves doing. Give her any sort of nutritional or diet challenge. She loves doing that stuff with me. So we're actually about to do that. I love that you gave me this breath meter test because I think that's what I'll use. What I'll get to start testing myself. Now, do you have any experience, or have you talked to? Because you've mentioned it here and there, like athletes, endurance athletes, performance athletes. Have you had any experience with seeing any sort of transition in them, like higher performance levels or increased energy? Because what I'm looking for is what you're talking about, being able to tap into that 60,000 calories that are stored. Because I've done this bike race before, and it was fine. I finished it, but I didn't really like my performance. I'm not an endurance guy, and at the end of the 100-mile race, I was like. I was beat down pretty bad.
How long were you keto adapted before you did the race?
No, last time I wasn't.
Oh, you were not? Okay, well, that's your issue.
No, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Last time I did not like my performance as a sugar burner, and I was having to stop like at every single thing and like eat their their oranges and gel pouches. And I'm trying to avoid that this time. Obviously, I'll have some stuff because it's a long race. I'll have to consume something. But I just wanted to get your take on it as far as any performance athletes you may have talked to or had experience with over the years.
Oh yeah, I've talked to bunches of them over the years. Timothy Allen Olson, who won this ultra marathon in a purely ketogenic state. I think when I interviewed him, I said, what did you eat during the race? Now, he had a little bit of the goo, but he used to be a sugar burning marathon runner, and he would use like packets upon packets upon packets. And he told me something like a third of what he would use normally. Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And then, he would supplement it with, say, almond butter. And so he would get a little bit of nutrition from almond butter. I will tell you somebody to look up who just recently decided to do a marathon with 2 weeks of training. He's a madman. Do you know Drew Manning?
I don't.
He's the fit to fat to fit guy. Remember, he's the guy that purposely made him. He's a trainer, purposely made himself bigger, and then to lose the weight. He got on the Dr. Oz show to talk about it, and he had a big book that came out, became a New York Times bestseller. Anyway, I'm good friends with him, and he just went to Hawaii and ran in a marathon with 2 weeks of training in a fully keto adapted state. So he would definitely be one that if you want to get more information about the nitty gritty of all that, he just went through it. And I'm sure he'd be a great guest for you if you wanted to get him on.
That's awesome, man. Well, thank you for that recommendation. Now, I do want to kind of switch gears here a little bit since
Sure.
You have such a diverse range of experience here. Now, another question I'm getting a ton from a lot of my athletes is fasting. And I know you've
other F word.
Yeah. I know you've written on fasting numerous times. And I'm going to start this one kind of open-ended, maybe with some benefits to fasting.
Yeah, fasting is, a lot of people say, well, the next fad, the latest fad is just fasting. I'm like, if fasting is a fad, somebody needs to go tell Jesus Christ that he started the longest running fad of all time. And not just Jesus. I mean, every major religion uses periods of fasting as a way to cleanse and detoxify. And we've used all these kind of language within religious circles. But even the ancient Greeks, if you go back and look, a lot of them were recommending fasting as a way to be healthy. And so our modern day culture doesn't let our brain go there. We go, oh, you're fasting, you're starving yourself. And so that's unhealthy. And we just have so many misconceptions about what fasting is. I think the coup d'etat as to why fasting is probably a good idea for people, at least like a 3-day fast, to give it a go, is the guy that won the Nobel Prize in medicine last year actually won it for his work with fasting and this thing called autophagy, where you're turning over the old cells. The guy's name, Yoshinori Osumi. Go look him up. He's a Japanese cell biologist, and he won the Nobel Prize last year in medicine for his work on autophagy. And basically what he found was that it quickly clears out the old cells and stimulates growth hormone for the production of new cells. And so if for no other reason, the autophagic turning over of these old cells, which you don't want old cells in your body, you want to get rid of those and have the new ones come in. That's anti-aging. That's going to replenish your body. It's going to make you run at a higher, more optimal level if you get rid of the junk. So, and fasting for as short as 3 days, and that might seem long to some people that have never fasted before, but just as short as 3 days can make this happen.
Wow, that's incredible. And do you recommend fasting in conjunction with keto?
Oh, yeah, of course. Because I think the purpose of both the ketogenic diet and of fasting is to lower insulin and to lower the inflammatory response of life, quite frankly. Just for example, last night I didn't get very good sleep. We're having some work done in my house, and so I was in a hotel, and I don't sleep well in hotels. And so I got very, very little sleep, so maybe an hour. And yet, because of the ketones and because of the anti-inflammatory, which usually you would be in a highly inflamed state with sleep deprivation, I'm not feeling that. Now I'm tired, but I'm actually able to be upright, whereas someone who's a sugar burner probably would not be right now.
And do you recommend or any starting point with fasting, or do you think 3 days is where people should start?
No. I think there's a natural progression. I think the first thing you need to do is go keto. Because
Okay.
if you go keto, here's the beautiful thing, Jared. When you go keto, you naturally, spontaneously start doing what's called intermittent fasting. So let's say your last meal of the day is at 6 o'clock at night. Okay, so you eat at 6 o'clock at night. You wake up the next morning. They say breakfast is the most important meal of the day, but they didn't tell you it had to be at 8 o'clock in the morning. It could be at noon or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So you go from 6 o'clock the night before till noon the next day. Guess what? That's an 18-hour intermittent fast. And then you can eat between 12 and 6. That's a 6-hour feeding window. So let's say you eat lunch at noon and you eat your dinner at 6. You got in a nice little intermittent fast spontaneously. Your body will tell you, oh my gosh, I'm satisfied. But our culture kind of tells us we need to eat at 8 o'clock and we need to eat at noon and we need to eat at 5 or 6 o'clock. Why? Because culture tells us to do it, not because our body is telling us to eat. And don't get me started on snacking. I think that's the stupidest thing in the world. From the guy that used to eat whole boxes of Little Debbie snack cakes and 16 cans of Coca-Cola. I forgot to mention that in my story a while ago, but
wow.
I was a junk food junkie. And so I think starting off with keto and then that transitions into intermittent fasting. And then I think you'll find that maybe you can go 24 hours without eating and then you push it a little more until you get to that 3 days to get the autophagic effects. Now, I actually have done several longer fasts because of my insulin resistance. And I've gone as long as 21 days in a row several times. And I also did a 28 out of 31 day in January last year. I did 28 out of the 31 days of fasting. So it's not impossible to do longer fasts. If you want to try 3, just remember Jimmy Moore did 21 several times.
Wow, that's insane, man. And I do want to have a question if it would work in reverse, just out of my own curiosity. Is starting a longer fast a good way to kind of jumpstart getting into ketosis?
Oh, what a great question. Yes. Yes is the question, or is the answer to your question, because you're going to see a huge ramping up of the ketones by day 3, 4. Day 1, 2 is going to suck. And we talk about in the Complete Guide to Fasting how to overcome the suckage of day 1 and 2. But by day 3, 4, you see a huge jump in your ketone levels. And so, yes, that could kickstart you very well into becoming that fat burner. And you'll see very high levels of ketones very quickly. But when you start eating again, if you go back to a ketogenic diet, you should see those normalize down into a sweet spot of kind of a 1.0 to 2.0 on the blood meter, the blood ketone meter. So yeah, great question. I think it's a fabulous way. The problem is if you're not already keto adapted, that first couple of days is truly hell. So I highly recommend get keto adapted first, then try the longer fast because it'll be a lot less pain.
And that makes sense. And so are you saying, because you said if to kind of make the transition a slower time frame is 2 to 4 weeks. So are you saying you can go into ketosis if you are okay with suffering through hell, you can get it knocked out in about 3 to 4 days?
Well, let's be clear what we're talking about here. Producing ketones and being keto adapted are 2 separate things. So fasting will produce a lot of ketones in the body. But in order to get keto adapted where the body is using them efficiently for fuel, that does take a period of time. And again, it's going to vary from person to person. I said 2 to 4 weeks as a generality.
Right.
410-pound Jimmy Moore probably took a month and a half, 2 months for him to truly get into ketosis and become keto adapted. Whereas when I went ketogenic from being low carb back in 2012, when I went fully ketogenic, I got keto adapted in 4 days because I was already really low carb. My problem was I was eating too much protein. So when I brought that protein down, I got right into a keto adapted state pretty quickly. So it's going to vary from person to person.
Yeah, I'm super interested in doing all this myself because I do eat a very low carb diet, but not low enough to be keto, but I'm wondering how the transition will work for me. All right, man, I'm going to shift gears on you here. I appreciate all the great information about fasting and ketosis. I know it's something I'm going to use and my listeners will use as well, and definitely anyone out there listening, go check out all of Jimmy's books, resources, podcasts on all of this great information. Now, I want to ask you, we call it the book question, so we give it to all of our listeners, and I'm going to throw it at you here. So say there's a nationwide curriculum implemented, and the president calls you up and he says you're responsible for one chapter of this book that's going out to every child in America. And every single child will have to read your chapter, be tested on, and pass it before they can graduate high school. What would your chapter be about?
Oh, my goodness. It would be the longest singular chapter of any book of all time because I have a lot to say. And I wish I could even go back to Jimmy Moore circa mid-'80s because I could have slapped that kid upside the head and said, look. But I think just trying to gently educate that how you eat now matters down the road. And of course, that's very difficult to communicate to a child, but we'd figure out a way because I think had I not gone through all that I did with my mom being a single mom and eating all the crappy garbage, as I now call it, in my diet growing up, I would not be dealing with the ramifications of that at the age of 45 today. So that would be what the chapter would be about is, hey, look, here's the reality of what this stuff that you think tastes good is doing to you. And here's some things that actually do taste good as well, but they're actually better options. So I think that's what's missing in a lot of trying to communicate to kids specifically now is we don't give them other options. They're just like, well, McDonald's is what I want. And if you give them real food that actually tastes delicious, they'll taste the chemicals in McDonald's and not want it anymore. You know, I've got a lot of friends that are raising their kids on real food and they've never been exposed to fast food. And then you give them like a little taste of it and they're just like, oh, what is this? And so I think if we try to close Pandora's box, which I know is very, very difficult, I think we could get somewhere.
I love that, man. I love just, I got to write this book. I got to put all these chapters together and see if I can get into as many parents' hands for their children in America as possible because all the answers from the guests have been phenomenal and yours is no different, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah, man.
All right, so I'm going to move to the quick fire questions of the show and then we'll finish things out here. So what is the hardest workout you've ever done?
Oh, I've heard nightmare stories about CrossFit, and so I haven't even tried. I can imagine in my head that that's hard. I did an obstacle course one time, and I about died because I don't climb walls real well. But I finished it. That was the thing. I finished it. And even though it was difficult, the fact that I felt accomplishment, even though it took me like 10 times as long as anybody else, I felt accomplishment of, hey, I got through the course and I did it. And so it was the hardest, but it was the most gratifying.
In your opinion, what's the best activity for building mental toughness?
Being challenged. I think if you go through life and think everything's hunky-dory and just pretend like everything is okay all the time, you're never going to get tougher mentally. In order to toughen yourself up, it's just like competition in sports. You know, those basketball players, they don't go out and say, oh, well, let's all score the same amount of points and we'll end in a tie. And isn't it great? No, LeBron James wants to beat your head in when he's playing you on the basketball court. Russell Westbrook wants to score a triple-double every single time he goes out on the court because he wants to help his team win the game. And so what does it? It's the challenge. It's making yourself go through a little bit of adversity. Adversity is good. People like to avoid conflict and avoid adversity. Run into the fire and you'll get more mentally tough faster than you ever thought possible.
I love that, man. All right. This is the question of the show. What is your best advice for becoming a better human? And this is 100% open-ended. It can be anything you want.
The best advice for being, what was it again?
For becoming a better human.
Of course, that's your show, Humanology. Yeah, I think authenticity. We live in such a fake world today. If you're listening to this podcast, I'm a real guy. And I try to be real. I try to always, if things are good, I tell you. If things are bad, I tell you. If things are really, really bad and ugly, I'm telling you. And I think too many people, especially online, it's very easy to hide behind Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and show what a perfect life you have. Meanwhile, behind the scenes in the real world, your life is crumbling and it's not as rosy as you put off. So stop pretending to be what you want people to think you are and start being who you are, 100% authentic.
That's great. All right, Jimmy, I really appreciate you being on the show, but I know our listeners are going to want to know where they can learn more about you, what you're doing, check out your books, whatnot. Where's the best place for them to go to learn about you and what you're doing?
I'm the easiest guy to find online. If you can't find livinlavitalow-carb.com, because that's a mouthful, and I was a Ricky Martin fan, by the way, when I created that blog and podcast. He's kind of old now. Nobody knows who. I'm just kidding. So Google Jimmy Moore. So just type in a Google search my name, and the first 2 pages are literally all my stuff.
Awesome, man. All right, and I highly recommend you guys go check out his podcast, his books, his site. A lot of great information, especially if you want more on fasting, ketosis, cholesterol, low carb, any of that stuff. Go check it out. Jimmy, thanks, man. This has been great. It's been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Thanks, Jared. My pleasure.
Your best. Losers always whine about their best.